more time on campaigning than they have time available for governance. And this is worth studying and worth comparing with other countries, because democracy has many advantages. One of the difficulties it provides for nations and for policymakers and those who govern nations is the time it takes to first of all take decisions on policy and to implement them. Non-democracies, of course, have the luxury of being able to roll out policy decisions very rapidly. Of course, they have their own disadvantages, lack of participation of the people, and sometimes faulty decisions getting implemented because of the lack of check and balance, but that's another topic altogether. So again, I'll come back and repeat, because this is worth remembering. The ratio of time available for governance to the time taken by campaigning. Now, if you compare other democracies with India, you will find that we have the lowest ratio. We have the lowest amount of time available for governing compared to the time given for campaigning. You compare this with any other democracy, whether large ones like the US, small ones, ones which follow the Westminster model, those who follow the presidential model. And the statistics add up very strongly that our leaders spend far more time in campaigning and have far less time available for governance. And this takes a toll on the nation. This takes a toll in, already democracies are slow in implementing policies because of participatory methods. And this special aspect of Indian democracy requiring having a very low ratio of time for governance to time for campaigning means that it adds to the delays, it adds to the problems that we have as a nation. This is well understood. And it is not as if we have always had continual election cycles. In fact, when we became independent, we had all our elections at one go starting in 1952, 5 years after the first post-independent government was installed without elections. So until 1967, so about 15 years, from the first government, from the first elections rather, we had simultaneous elections everywhere. Then in 1967 onwards, the alignment started to go askew because of the measures taken by the then union government, which started dismissing state assemblies and having midterm elections. And this has been going on ever since then. And since 1967, the ratio has been worsening for India. We have the worst ratio in the world of time available for governance compared to time given to campaigning. Now, the need for change has also been understood for a very long time. This is not a new thing. So back in 1983, that is 37 years ago, the Election Commission first mooted the idea that we must once again realign all the elections, the state and the national elections, so that they be held together. This idea was again taken up 16 years later in 1999 by the Law Commission, which referred to it in its report. Then in 2016, Prime Minister Modi has been, since 2016, has been advocating it in the interest of the nation. And based on that, Niti Aayog has gone into it and prepared detailed analysis back in 2017. And in 2018, the Law Commission brought out a working paper, and it has gone into the, see, it's not just something that can be wished and can happen at the stroke of a pen because of the constitutional requirements. And the Law Commission in 2018, in the paper that it brought out, says that there will be at least 5 constitutional recommendations that will be required to bring this about. If any of you are further interested in this topic, you should go into the Law Commission report and the other reports. Or of course, let me use this platform to push my book, which was published last year, called Lutyens' Maverick. And one of the chapters is in fact dedicated to this idea of aligning our elections. So it has many other benefits, of course. The model code of conduct, which gets applied even to regional elections affects decision making. Many national decisions get held up, even though the elections are regional. The costs add up when you have a continual cycle of elections rather than one streamlined one. Stability, because once a government is elected, even at a national level, it has a tenure for 5 years. But even if it has that tenure, even if it has a majority in the lower house in parliament, if it is constantly distracted by having to campaign, then it really affects stability. And that is another aspect to keep in mind. And of course, the balance between rational policies and populist policies also gets skewed, because elections, of course, bring about the pressures, populist pressures. And if you have continual elections, those populist pressures are continual rather than every 5 years. And so these are the reasons why we must all very strongly want aligned elections. But as I said, all of these issues can be boiled down into the ratio of time available for governance compared to the time taken by campaigning. Many credible voices have also spoken up for this. For example, former Chief Election Commission, Dr. S.Y. Qureshi, has very strongly advocated aligning elections, and many others. So I would like to not speak for much longer. I think I'll give some reasons as to why this has happened. The technical reason, of course, is the starting with Indira Gandhi's prime ministership, the dismissal of state governments, and the dismissal of state assemblies leading to new elections is the technical reason. But there is a deeper reason that has caused this. Now, if you look back, we are the only large and diverse democracy that has a Westminster model. Most large democracies, and particularly diverse ones, have presidential forms of democracy. So if you look at the US, it has a presidential form. And the presidential form of governance, actually of democracy, ensures a fixed term, and it does not have continual elections. So the US, as you know, has 2 cycles. So they've just had the election a couple of months ago, and along with the national election, they had a large number of state and their Senate and Congress elections. And again, 2 years later, which is midterm for them because of a 4-year term, 2 years later, they will have another cycle of elections where the national government doesn't go to elections because it has a 4-year term. But in 2 years' time, the rest of the many other senators, rest of the congressmen, etc., they will all be having elections at the same time. So what that does is the US doesn't have continual elections. It has these 2 cycles. Now, we must look at the counter arguments to people who want this continual cycle to continue. So one ostensible reason they give, and there is some merit in this which we must consider, is that these midterm elections, they put a pressure on the government which has been elected for a full term, that even during that term, they should not be complacent, they should be responsive to people. So there is some degree of merit in that, but here is the crux. So when it is once during the term, you have a midterm election cycle, which acts as a check and balance, so that whoever President Joe Biden has been elected, he will have full 4 years, but 2 years later, there will be other elections, midterm elections, and that will force him to be responsive to his public and to voters and to be accountable, even though he has a full 4-year term. Now, there is some merit in that. But when you take that to ridiculous lengths, that instead of once in the midterm cycle, you have elections every 3 or 4 months to keep somebody responsive to public opinion, then it not only is it ridiculous, it's counterproductive. Because then why have a national government? Why elect them for 5 years if you don't want to give them any freedom to operate and you want them to be continually under check and balance of electoral pressures every 3 months? Where does it end? Why not every elections every month? Why not have government appointed only for a week and have elections every week? You know, that's how ridiculous it can get. So to the extent that there is merit, that even though you have a full term as government, once you're elected, in between, you should have some pressures. Of course, you have pressures from opposition in parliament, you have media, you have people protesting. But in terms of really taking the public's temperature, if elections are the way to do it, then perhaps there is a case for a once a midterm, during the midterm, one cycle of elections. So here we have to keep in mind that I don't think anybody is really talking about changing our constitution and converting India into a presidential form, which would avoid continual elections. But we are talking about tweaking the Westminster model, the parliamentary system that we have, which will bring about more stability, which will improve the ratio of um, time available for governance to time given for campaigning. And we have to understand there is a technical issue built into the nature of Westminster-style parliamentary democracies, which is that the term is not assured. Unlike in the US, in a presidential system, you have a 4 years assured term. Here, the term for government is not assured. It depends on having a majority in the Lok Sabha as far as the national government is concerned, and in the assembly as far as state governments are concerned. And so, yes, we can align it. We can bring about these 5 constitutional changes that the Law Commission is talking about, if we can build that opinion, if we can have that majority. But we also have to anticipate that this alignment, just like we had aligned elections from 1952 onwards, but by 1967, they became unaligned, and then it became continual. So the potential exists that the same thing can happen in the future, even if you align it once. But it is crucially important first to align all the elections, and then to anticipate the second problem of what would happen if, again, once again, some state does not get a majority. You have a midterm election. So there are suggestions that for those cases, you can have a midterm cycle. And I have talked about that in my chapter in my book of Lutyens' Maverick, to go into it in more detail. So since that is actually, that will require a lot of time to explain the nuances, I will not go into that here. I will just say that it is crucially important to align our elections for the benefits that I have been talking about, which can all be summarized in this ratio of time available for governance to time given for campaigning. But even after we achieve it, even if we, through seminars like this, webinars like this, we build opinion, and we can take that then to Parliament and bring about these changes, even then we will have to anticipate the next issue, that what happens if 15 years later, some state governments don't last the full term, they collapse in the middle, then they have midterm elections. Will they also be every 3 months, or can we find a midterm cycle where all of them can be aligned so that you have 2 cycles? These are issues that we need to talk about. So finally, I will conclude by saying is that there is absolutely, it's a no-brainer that we should have aligned elections. Look at all other countries. There is no other country in the world that has continual elections every 3 or 4 months. It's not a good thing. Democracy is a very good thing, but we must optimize the benefits of democracy and not make it this kind of a distortion. It was never envisioned in our constitution. Our founding fathers and mothers never imagined that because of midterm elections, all the elections will get unaligned, because we started out with aligned elections. So something which was an unintended consequence should be corrected for, and we should reap the full benefits of democracy and not have this scattered cycle of full elections, of continual elections. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll be happy to take a couple of questions.
Yes.
Once again, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an elucidative presentation. There are a couple of questions, sir. I'll club them into one and I'll ask you. So there is one looming concern by Hemendra and Aditya Kashyap. Given the election cycle as it exists in India, the implementation of simultaneous election, whenever it happens, would require either the premature dissolution or extension of the state assemblies. Will that be feasible without a substantial amendment to the Constitution of India?
So this is one of the technicalities that is worth dwelling on and finding a solution. I think there are many ways to find an equitable solution. So, we could obviously, since they are unaligned, if you now then take measures to align them, some states will not have the full term. But perhaps what you can do is align this over a period of 2 elections and plan it out so that the states which are going into midterm elections today, when they have elections, it would already be said that, okay, this term you have a full term, but next time around, the term is only going to be for 3 years, and then it will be aligned with the national election. So this could be one solution. So see, because today the people of such a state have elected a government for 5 years. So they may have a reasonable expectation that the state should be governed in that manner for 5 years. So this is something that is worth accommodating. And therefore, if it could be done over 2 cycles, that take at this time when the national elections happens, you don't have to have it because you are already an elected state. But by the next time, when you go into election itself, it is a precondition that that will be a 3-year term, let us say, so that you get aligned. So if you have 2 cycles, of course, it may be easier to align most states without any loss of term. So this could be one way to do it.
Correct, sir. And in fact, in that direction only, Honorable Prime Minister had a dialogue with the leader of 21 political parties towards building a consensus. So one last question, sir, before we let you go. There are concerns from regional parties that single cycle or 2 cycle election will give unintended edge to large national political parties and hurt their prospects. Your take, sir.
Okay, so what they are saying is this, meaning that India should be unique in a way that harms the nation, because this concern is not there in any other democracy. In any other democracy, the concern is not there that, if there is a Trump wave or there is a Biden wave or there is a Boris Johnson wave, then other parties will be hurt if they have, if they don't have midterm elections. So that's a bizarre argument. So the argument can be summed into not so much about national parties, but about Modi ji, because not always are national parties so dominant. Today, we have an extremely popular prime minister, who, without doubt, the most popular democratic leader in the whole world. And so obviously, regional parties have that fear that, if they are clubbed together with that one cycle and with Modi ji campaigning, that they will suffer setbacks. So first of all, it's not a reasonable demand. It's not a reasonable demand to say that they must have continual elections just so that they are not aligned in a campaign against Prime Minister Modi and the national party that he leads. Secondly, this also we can probably find an innovative answer. Suppose we agree to aligning the elections at a future date, when we don't know which will be the dominant national party, we don't know who will be the dominant national leader. So it's clearly being agreed in the national interest. This could be a possibility, but I don't really want to accommodate this request by putting this off for a future. I'm just putting it up as a hypothetical requirement. In India, opposition has to get used to the idea that if the people haven't voted for them, then they have to bide their time for 5 years. During that 5 years, they have to take their arguments to the people. They have to act in a manner that people give them some response, and not try to disrupt government, and not try to have these continual cycles as a weirdly alternative method of somehow remaining in government, because it doesn't exist in any other democracy.
Sir, if we have a couple of minutes, and you can allow one last question, sir. Sir, there is a
I can take 2 questions. I can even be here for another 3-4 minutes.
Excellent. There is a question by Dr. Shipra Mathur. She's suggesting that a survey says that there are 70% chances of a ruling party getting elected in state and general elections if held simultaneously. How this issue will be addressed?
So this is the same issue as the previous one. So, if you have a popular national leader and you have a popular and successful national party, obviously, if you have simultaneous elections, there will be some overflow benefit to local elections taking place at the same time for that party. But so what? That's the case with every democracy in the world. So what? Why should we be so afraid of the people's choice? This statistic that is being pointed out is not something that is forced on people. It is whenever simultaneous elections are held, this statistic, I've heard different figures. This is 70%. Some people have said different numbers. Whether it is 70% or 40% or any number, that the benefit goes to a certain national leader or a certain national party, it's not as if this is done against the will of the people. This is the people who are voting. It is their will. And this is exactly how it happens in every country. So why should in our country the opposition get a special offset so that they are not subject to the people's will, because the people's will is going towards a very popular national party and a very popular national leader? So what? Let them work hard and let them also try to build up national leaders, and let them also try to get traction with people so that next time around, maybe they could be the dominant party.
So there is a response from the audience itself. Mr. Giriraj says that I think voters are smart enough. We have seen it in Odisha itself, where people voted for BJP and like differently for BJP in BJP. So democracy will not be threatened with this.
Precisely. That's also another very good argument that the statistics do show that if you have a very popular national leader like we have in the current prime minister, it does benefit the party if you have simultaneous elections. But like I said, so what? Now, the second issue is that, yes, since it is people's will, you have seen very often, if you think about not just simultaneous elections, but elections which are just 2-3 months apart, you have seen in some states, like in Delhi or in a few other states, that you have had national elections where the people's vote has gone entirely in one direction. And just few months later, you have local elections and the vote has gone entirely in another direction. And you gave the Odisha example, which is a very good example. So the whole essence of democracy is that we must trust the people's decision. And we can't try to re-engineer the process so that somehow it gives an extra handicap to benefit regional parties or others who can't secure the people's support during simultaneous elections. It's not there in any other country. Why should it be there in this country for opposition? Why should Indian opposition have special benefits that no other opposition in no other democratic country has?
Sir, Mr. Harit Gandhi is curious. He is asking, do we see one nation, one election making any headway for 2024, or it will still take time?
I don't want to speculate on the time, but the Prime Minister has spoken about it and revived the debate in a very big way. I've given you these examples that this is not a new topic. Since 1983, the Election Commission, the Law Commission, the Niti Aayog, former Chief Election Commissioners have all been arguing for it. But the Prime Minister now has been championing this for the last several years, and it is getting traction. And I'm hoping through webinars like this and through op-eds and through other events, we can build the necessary support, because we desperately need this. We all know how much of a toll, at least those who are into policy, those who spend time and understanding this, we all know what a toll it takes in delayed decisions, in delayed implementation of policy. I've just come from the Northeast. I was there for the past few days. In the past 5-6 years, it has seen a dramatic thrust in development. Railways coming for the first time to Tripura, railways coming for the first time to Manipur, almost in the final stages, many other such things. Now, this, despite the handicaps of continual elections, if you had democracy and election cycles similar to other democracies, then that ratio would be much better. Ratio for time available for governance would be much better. What we have achieved in 6 years in the Northeast is much more than what was achieved in 70 years before that. But we could have achieved this in 4 years. We could have achieved this in 3.5 years. And it's important. It's very crucial to speed up our developmental trajectory, because we are now knocking at middle income status, and we can't afford to have hundreds of millions of Indians still behind the curve.
Thank you so much, sir, for your brief but a very remarkable presentation and addressing each and every question that was raised by the audience. Next, we have, and we would have hoped that if you had some time, we have an academic perspective, a constitutional perspective by Dr. P. Puneet, who is an associate professor at Center for Study of Law and Governance, Jawaharlal Nehru University, who is going to speak about the challenges and the constitutional requirements that would be required for having such an arrangement. Thank you so much, Panda.
I'm afraid I have another engagement. I'll miss it, but I look forward to getting hold of the recording of his presentation.